So as you know, we're in Psalm 119, verse 145 tonight. We'll try to go through verse 152. Have you ever had a day when you felt like nothing seemed to go right? Oh. I suspect if you're breathing, you would have to answer yes to that. Have you ever had a week where it felt like nothing went right? Maybe a month. Please don't tell me you ever had a year that felt like that. But I have had days literally where I've said to God, can I just go back and get back into bed and start the day over again, because this one's not working out the way I had it planned. And maybe you got, I'm not Jerry Stout. Jerry Stout's my best friend. He keeps a journal. And he literally writes a list every day of what he's going to accomplish that day. And at the end of the day, he goes back and revisits the list. And he's been a very successful person, so maybe we should do this. At the end of the day, if there's 3 or 4 things he didn't get to, he rewrites that evening the list for the next day and starts with those 4 things. He does that every single day of his life. I'm not that ridiculous, but I do in my mind have a plan for what I like. I even pray about it on my way to work every day. God, I literally prayed on Monday morning, God, as I get to the office, would you help illuminate Psalm 119 to me as I study that today? God, let me rightly divide the word of truth. Guide me, give me creativity, those kinds of things. And I also structure my day knowing that I set up appointments and things like that with people. I pretty much know, because I have a paper calendar, exactly what I'm going to be facing that day. And I've had days when I've gotten to the office and none of what I had planned. I'm literally saying I've had a day this week that seemed like nothing I had planned went the way I had it planned. I suspect you have too. How about this one? Let's go a step further. Have you ever cried yourself to sleep because of your circumstances? Have you ever gone to bed at night thinking about that thing you're struggling with, and the very first thought you had when you did, if you got any sleep, the first thought of the next morning was that same old thing again? Boy, I have. I have laid in my bed in the fetal position and cried myself to sleep many times. I know you probably have too. By the way, if you've done any of what I just described tonight, you and the psalmist have a lot in common. As I share with you, I've shared every week, and I hope that when we're finished with all this, you guys will be an expert at this too. We don't know who wrote this psalm. I think I came back to you, I think we believe it's like 58% of the psalms we know with great certainty, I think, were written by David. The rest we don't. There's some really good guesses we can have. Psalm 119, we don't know who wrote it, but we know a lot about who wrote it because of what he writes about. Does that make sense to you? And it's obvious that we're talking about a person that loved God and wanted to serve God, but was being treated very unfairly by the circumstance of life. You get the last one. Look at that. That's the golden ticket. That's cool. And so we're in Psalm 119, verse 145 tonight. So anyway, he's obviously been treated very unfairly because of his faith. And if anything, I've taught you this. Psalm 119 really tells a glowing illustration of what happens when someone at that crossroads of life, when it's like, why should I serve God anymore? I'll just give up on that in my faith. Or I'm going to press in and just trust God and cling to him and not let go of him. And I'm going to trust his word with all of my heart. I made that decision in my life years ago. I hope you've made that decision, that I absolutely will not let go of God. I'm going to trust his word. When it doesn't make sense, I'm going to trust him. On the sunshiny day, when everything seems to go right, I'm going to trust him. When it's cloudy and it doesn't look good, I'm going to trust him anyway, right? This is a glowing illustration. It's a master class on what it means to really trust God and trust his word. And so when we get to this text tonight, it's obvious that he's going through these difficulties, and he's probably in that fetal position, literally it seems, crying himself to sleep during this time because he's tried so hard to honor God with his life. And so every one of us has been in a place in our life where it felt unfair. We were pressing into God. We were chasing God. We were trying. Our prayer life was vibrant, but it just seemed like it wasn't clicking. And maybe that's how he felt that night. So let's walk through this outline I gave you tonight. The first thing on the outline is this. Title, by the way, is Desperate for God. I hope we've all been desperate for God. Notice the tears of the psalmist. The first thing he talks about is his tears. And let me read verses 145 through 148. It says, I cried with all my heart, answer me, O Lord. I will observe your statutes. I cried to you, and I shall keep your testimonies. I rise before the dawn and cry for help. I wait for your words. My eyes anticipate the night watches, and that I may meditate on your word. So write this in your notes. First of all, the fervency of his heart. The first thing I see in verse 145 is the fervency of his heart. And while you're there, go ahead and write this down. Notice the passion of his prayer. In verse 145, words mean things, right? It says, I cried with all of my heart, answer me, O Lord. The word cried there is the word kar. It's spelled Q-A-R-A, kuara. It literally means this, to cry out, to call aloud. How about this? To roar. When he says here in verse 145, it really, again, words matter. He's not saying here, I was sitting over in the corner whimpering a little bit, or there was a tear that just went down my face. He was crying uncontrollably. Have you ever been in that place before? Boy, I sure have. I used to brag. I'm almost ashamed of this because those of you that know me know I can cry carrying the trash out at my house. I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous. And I don't like that, I'll be honest. I used to brag to people about, I called it the gift of not crying. I could do funerals for people that I loved and I was going to miss, and God just gave me this supernatural ability just to hold it together, never to cry. I used to really I almost bragged about that. And as you see, God's got a great sense of humor. Now I cry all the time, right? I remember, I didn't think it'd be that hard. I've literally done over 1,000 funerals in my life. Can y'all believe that? I remember one year I did 58 funerals in 1 year. I could not believe that. That's more than one a week. But I remember when my father passed away, my two brothers, who are awesome dudes, they're like, you got it, you're the preacher. We don't need to say anything. And I would have beat somebody up for the privilege to do my father's funeral. Me and my dad had talked about it. He had shared what his favorite scriptures were and what songs he wanted sung and the whole bit. And can I just be honest with you guys and say that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. It really was. And some of you may have even been there that day. And I don't think I cried a whole lot. I'm sure I cried a little bit. But anyway, it's like after that, I just had this peace about myself. And I remember one day, it wasn't probably just a few weeks after that, of all places, we were at the Burger King right up here on 22nd Street. And Faith and Tracy were sitting at the little round table with me. We're eating a hamburger together. And out of nowhere, it's like a fire hydrant. I started crying uncontrollably. I was embarrassed. And right in the middle of all places, I'm right in the middle of Burger King, and Tracy and Faith just didn't know what to do because it's like I fell apart. And it's like all that I'd been holding back, it just kind of came out. That's this. He says, I cried. He's roaring. He's not just whimpering, really wish God would come. He's crying out to God. Lord, how be in this place? Where are you right now? I mean, he's just roaring and is crying. And every one of you have probably been in a place like that. Maybe it wasn't just an emotional thing. Maybe it was something about what was going on with your kids or a friend or whatever it might be. He's not just whimpering here. He's actually crying out. He's roaring before God. Then he goes on to say this. He says, I cried with all of my heart. Luke chapter 10, verses 25, all the way down through verse 29. Y'all know that text really well. He said, you love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, right? I've taught y'all this before. That word heart is the word viscera. It means the inward parts of man. And I've told you this before, when you say to your spouse, I love you with all of my heart, you're not saying I love you with that pump in my chest that pumps blood through my body. That would be kind of ridiculous. What you're saying to your spouse is, I love you with everything I have physically. Am I the only man in the room that doesn't even have to have a prayer about it? If someone put a gun to my wife's head and a gun to my head and said, which one, blow me away. I don't have to pray about that. I think I'm like every man in the room. I would give my life up, obviously, for my family and for other people that are not even blood relatives of mine. I really believe I would. I love you with all of my heart, right? So he's saying here, he says, I cried with all of my heart. He's saying, I cried with everything I had physically. And I bet many of you in this room have probably been in a place like that before where you're just uncontrollable. So he's not just having a sad moment and a little tear went down his cheek, right? He's undone. He's crying out. He is hurt. He's in a difficult place. He says, I cried with all of my heart. Notice, second of all, notice the promise of prayer, the promise of his prayer. He says, I cried with all of my heart. Answer me, O Lord. And then it says this, I will observe your statutes. In verse 146, it says, I cried to you, save me, and I shall keep your testimonies. And so two things. He said, I will observe your statutes and I shall keep your testimonies. He's making a promise. God, I'm crying out to you and I'm praying to you right now, but I'm promising you this. No matter what, I'm not giving up on your word. I wonder what it does to the devil when he's got you that close to giving up. And have we all not been there? Boy, I've been that close to just saying, forget it. You know, I could sell, I bet I'd be a pretty good used car salesman. I bet I could sell insurance. I bet I could this. I bet, that close. And all of a sudden you make the decision, you know what? But I'm just going to trust God's word. I bet the devil gets so frustrated. I bet it's like, the fingernails going down the chalkboard to him when somebody says, you know what? Devil, I know it's tough, and I'm crying with all of my heart right now, but I'm not giving up on God. I'm going to trust him anyway. So he says those two things. John Phillips, someone I love to read, he said this. He says, his passion shows his desperation for God, and his promise shows his determination for God. I like that. I'm crying out because, God, I'm desperate for you. I got nowhere else to go. And I'm going to trust you, and I'm coming to you with tears in my eyes. I'm crying out to you, God, I need you so desperately in this situation in my life. But he says, I'm not going to give up on you. So you see, again, in one point, his desperation, but also his determination. What a great place to be, guys. That's where we need to be. We do need to live in desperation for God. Number 2, write this down, the frustration of his heart. The frustration of his heart. Verse 147, he says, I rise before the dawn and cry for help. I wait for your words. My eyes anticipate the night watches that I may meditate on your word. Every one of us have walked in these moccasins probably too. You're lying through your teeth if you tell me there's not been a time that you've said, God, why not? Why haven't you answered? Why don't I hear from you? Why haven't you moved in my situation? I'm seeking you. I'm trying to live a clean life. I'm trying to be desperate in the prayer closet. Why are you being so quiet? I've lived those in those moccasins too. You almost see the frustration. He says, I rise before the dawn and cry for help. God, I'm getting up early in the morning, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm running to you. But it seems like you're being totally silent. You're not moving in my situation. What in the world is going on? The frustration of his heart. C.H. Spurgeon said this, very famous quote. He says, when you cannot trace the hand of God, you must trust the heart of God. We have to. That is truly the definition of faith, isn't it? We can't see it, and it doesn't make sense, but I'm going to trust him anyway, right? And so when you can't see and trace his hand, just trust his heart. I learned a long time ago that God would never do anything harmful to me. I don't think he would ever want to do that. And I know that because I'm a daddy. And I got 3 daughters, and I would never on purpose ever mislead them, give them false information, not do everything in my power to do my very best for them. If I can feel that way as a physical person, a sinner saved by grace, imagine how God feels about his children. And so if I don't see it, maybe I just need to trust him anyway. And so I've been frustrated. I bet you've been frustrated. I know I've cried out to God before and asked why. And by the way, God's got big shoulders. He can take it. He's not going to push you away because you come and question why the timing's off or whatever. But as you just said to me a minute ago, Earl, his timing's always perfect. And I know it is. And so we trust him even when we can't see that. So he was frustrated, and why wouldn't he have been, right? The second point in the outline tonight is notice the thirst of the psalmist, his thirst. And the first thing I noted here was note his petition. Notice his petition in verse 149, which is an incredible, we could probably spend all night just in this one verse. It says, hear my voice according to your loving kindness. Revive me, O Lord, according to your ordinances. Oh man, look at verse 150. So those who follow after wickedness draw near. They are far from your law. You are near, O Lord, and all your commandments are truth. Let's go back to verse 149. Man, this, again, we could stay here forever. He says, hear my voice according to your loving kindness. Revive me, O Lord, according to your ordinances. I've taught you this. I suspect some of you could even quote it. Fisher Humphreys was my theology professor in seminary. And I always remembered I could go pull a couple of his books off my shelf and let you guys read them. And you'd go, man, those are awesome books. He wrote a especially good book about the cross that was just amazing. And I remember when I was in seminary, you're talking about in the mid to late 1980s, he was highly criticized by some of his peers because they thought he was too simple. His theology wasn't deep enough. And I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's a gift to take complicated, difficult things to understand and make them understandable. I think that's a gift, actually. Go and find for me a time in Jesus' messages where he had such deep theology nobody could understand it. In fact, the children, it seemed like, could understand what he had to say. And so it's not my job to stand up and prove to you guys that I've been to seminary before or that I've taken Greek and Hebrew. I'll use those things to help you understand words. But my job is to take these things and help them to be understandable and applicable to our lives, right? And so Fisher Humphreys is the one who coined this, and he got criticized for it, but his definition of prayer, and I know some of you can actually quote this, prayer is talking to God who listens and responds because he loves us. Now you can imagine some deep theologian going, well, that's too simple. Well, give me some simple. I like it. Prayer is talking to God who listens and responds, not because he has to, but because he chooses to. Isn't that an interesting way to think about prayer? That should even help your prayer life. You're not talking to a celestial God who's a million miles away that does not love you. You're not looking at a God who wants his pound of flesh for the day, who's some Shylock in heaven looking for his pound of flesh. He's your heavenly Father. He desperately loves you. He's done everything in the world he can do to demonstrate his love for us. That's who we're talking to. And so when you go to him in prayer, you don't have to use the king's language. Oh, this of my father. You don't have to say that. Now, we should not be disrespectful, but I think it's okay to say, hey, Daddy. I called my father from 1988 till the day he died every Sunday after church, every week. If I failed, I think one time I forgot to call him, and he called me and said, where's my phone call? You know, it's like, and I still continue to this day. Before I leave this campus, I'm on the phone with my mother, still doing that to this very day. And we had some of the best talks. But when I called my dad on the phone, whether I was in New Orleans, Louisiana, or on the mission field somewhere, or wherever it was, I didn't say, oh, thou art of my father. I said, hey, Daddy, he's my dad. I knew he loved me, and I loved him and respected him so much. I'm missing so much today. That's prayer. And so listen to this prayer. It says, hear my voice according to your loving kindness. Prayer is talking to God who listens and responds because he loves us. If you'll look deeply in this verse, you'll find out the grace and the mercy that's involved in him choosing to hear. The only reason it's not just a one-way communication, it's a two-way communication, is because of two things he gives them to right. Number one, according to your loving kindness. You know why he chooses to listen to your prayer and love you and stick with you through thick and thin? It's because of his loving kindness. That's the word chesed in Scripture, by the way. It's a very common word. It's not an uncommon word at all. It's a very, very common word, but it literally means mercy, grace, love. In other words, he chooses to hear our prayers and be concerned about what's going on in our lives and care about those things. He commands us to bring those petitions to him. He wants us to bring our burdens to him. He desires that. It's because of his chesed, because of his loving kindness, because of his mercy and his grace and his love. We don't deserve that. We don't. But he grants it to us because of who he is. And then he uses another word. If you look back at the text, you hear my voice according to your loving kindness. And then he uses the word revive me, O Lord. And the word revive, there's the word chaya. It literally means this, to make alive, to restore, or even to rescue. Isn't that what he's done? I don't know about you guys, but in 1974, when I got on my knees and asked him to save my soul, he literally made me alive. I went from a dead man to a live man right there in that moment, 11-year-old boy. He restored me. He rescued me. And the reason he chooses even to this day to hear my prayers and be concerned about what's going on and care about what I have to say to him is because of his mercy and his grace and because he rescued me. The value of every person in this room is not based upon what anyone says in this world. It's based upon what he was willing to do to redeem you. There's your value. That value has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with who he is. He is an amazing, amazing Savior. Write this down. Number two, notice his predicament. His predicament. Verse 150 is really descriptive, isn't it? It says, those who follow after wickedness draw near. They are far from your law. And I just wrote this in my notes. Those who were far from God were near to him. That's not a place you want to be, is it? I mean, think about that. I don't know if I told you about the other night. I don't have dreams a lot like I used to. I used to have vivid dreams. And I may have told you this last Wednesday, but I had this vivid dream the other night. And they were like, I can't really describe them to you, but it seemed like these big, gigantic, like snakes that were like just slithering toward me. And if I kicked them 3 times, they would go away. And all of a sudden, here comes another one, and I'd kick it 3 times, and it would go away, and then another one come, and all of a sudden, they started coming from every direction. And I was kicking as hard as I could, but I couldn't kick them 3 times and make them all go away. You think maybe that's the way he felt? And was that, I mean, I think God does speak to us through dreams. And I think the devil tries to discourage us through dreams. I believe that with all of my heart. In a moment like that, it's a really good time to just go, hey, devil, not tonight. And ask in Jesus' name for them to go away. But Tracy, who is prone to have nightmares from time to time, and I'm having Tracy, wake up, whatever, wakes me up and says, stop kicking. She said I was literally kicking in the bed. I think I threw my hip out trying to kick at that weird angle I was out. But I was in a battle, right? He is physically, this isn't a dream he's having right here. He says, listen to me. He says, those who follow after wickedness have drawn near to me. All these jokers that are far from you and from your word, they're really near to me right now. He's crying out from a place, man, he's like, I'm in the foxhole and here comes the enemy. So you think maybe, let's just be honest. Can anybody in the room be honest with me is your prayer life better when things are going smooth in your life or when all hell's broke loose? I mean, can we be honest? Yeah. We tip our hat to prayer when things are smooth. But man, when you're in the foxhole and the devil's attacking and the enemy's out to get you, man, we can get serious about prayer. You think maybe he is crying out? You think maybe he's in the fetal position? You think maybe he's yelping and roaring in his? Yes, he's meaning, but he says, God, man, the enemy is gathered around me right now. They're far from you, but they're really, really close to me. And so that was his predicament. But I love the third thing. Notice God's position. And that, man, this is, guys, if you didn't come here for anything tonight, I hope you take this with you. Verse 151. Verse 150. They're surrounding me. They're out to get me. I'm trying to kick them, and I can't kick them 3 times and make them go away, right? Verse 151. You are near, O Lord, and all your commandments are true. Holy smokes. Why? What a position for that verse to be in. In the time when you feel the most surrounded, with the most evil around you, when you feel like the devil's just taking you down, you need to hear this. God is near. And his word is still true. In the worst place you've ever been, I'm telling you, as far as you've ever been from where you wanted to be, it did not change that truth. You can't go in a cave deep enough or a mountain high enough to get away from the presence of God if you're his. What a great word. Because every one of us, I mean, I'll be blunt and say this has not been my favorite week that I've ever lived. But it doesn't change anything about that. He's not left me. He's not forgotten about me. He cares for me. He loves me. His word is still true. And that's what drags us back and keeps us in our lane, doesn't it? And so what a great word. He had this great predicament. Man, this is a bad place to be. And everybody I don't want around me right now is around me right now. But here's the great news. You've not left me. You've never left me or forsaken me. And I know everyone in this room, we've been through thick and thin, but he's never left you. He's not going to leave you. What a great truth to hang our hats on, right? Man, there's a couple of stories come to my mind, but have you ever been in a place when you felt like this guy felt, that it's like you're just surrounded by the enemy? I'm not saying you've given into the enemy, but you just feel like, I mean, in the spiritual realm, you feel as though you're surrounded by everything you don't want. Not the place you want to be or what it may be. And have you ever been in that place and then felt, even physically in this world, especially physically in this world, someone stepped between you and whatever it was you were dealing with and made you feel safe? Now, some of you heard the story. I grew up in Hickson, Tennessee most of my life. And we lived in Valley Brook, right on the golf course. And you never know about me now, the way I look physically, but I used to be really slender and a really good athlete. I was Mr. Basketball at Hickson High School in 1981. I've got the trophy in my office if you want to see it. It's the tallest trophy I have. I was a really good basketball player. I was better at golf than basketball, and I could have played either one of those sports in college. Exceptionally good at golf. Never took a lesson, just God gave me a natural ability to do it. I don't know why I just never entertained going to college and doing those things. But anyway, I loved basketball. I would go out if it snowed like the other day, and I would scrape all the snow and ice off the driveway so I could play basketball in the cold weather. I just played all the time. And we had next door neighbors, the Mulrooney's. They lived right next door to us, and interesting fella. I always, I never really knew how to take him. He was just kind of a sour old man, is what he kind of came across in. But anyway, we're out there playing basketball one evening, and my dad had spotlights put up there where we could see and play anytime, whatever. And I think it was getting close to dusk. It wasn't dark yet. But I remember Mr. Mulrooney came out on the front porch and started just yelling. He may have cussed us, I don't remember, but I know he's yelling at us, "Cut those lights on!" And so we cut the lights off and we went inside, and my dad says, "Son, what are y'all doing?" And so Mr. Mulrooney was out there yelling at us to to get off the court and do whatever. So Daddy walked out with us. He said, "Go tuck those lights back on and play a little bit more if you want to." So my dad walks out there with us, and as soon as we started bouncing the ball again, here comes Mr. Mulrooney out on his porch. I'll never forget. Came out in the yard a little bit, yelling at us to stop, and I'll never forget the rest of my life. My dad just walked over there between us and Mr. Mulrooney, said a few words to Mr. Mulrooney about how he needed to go back in his house and mind his own business. And he turned around and said, "Boys, y'all play all you want to." I mean, I felt like my dad was, We lived in North Augusta, South Carolina, where it never snows. One day I was at school. We lived in a neighborhood called Hammond Hills, and literally the school was about as far as from here, probably just a little bit farther than the fire hall from where we lived. I walked to school every day. It was a dream. I remember sitting in the cafeteria at lunchtime and looked outside. It never snowed there, I'm telling you. And the biggest snowflakes you've ever seen in your life just started, like, everybody's going crazy. They're screaming and looking out the windows. This is elementary school age. And I think they sent us home a little early that day. It snowed for days. I remember, I have a picture. It's 23 inches of snow, which I'm sure is an all-time record. In North Augusta, South Carolina, it would have been in the late 1970s, they had no snow equipment. It's not like they only had a few plows. It shut that place down for a week. We didn't go to school for almost a week. We lived in this little bowl that was on Dunbarton Lane. I still remember the name of the road. It's like there was a hill, and it would go down, and then it would level off for about a city block, and then it went back up. Perfect for sledding. Perfect. So we would get up on the hill, and we'd sled down there, and we'd ride it out about where it got to the other hill, and we'd get off and do it again. Well, some guy decided he was going to go to work. No one had even tried to drive. I mean, nobody had snowed anything, And this guy was trying to get up on this hill and get momentum and get all the way down and try to climb that other hill. He just couldn't get out of there. And he almost hit us while we were sledding. And I don't know if I ever saw my father run in my entire life. But here comes my dad running down there. And I don't know what he said to that man, but I know this. He went and put his car back in the garage, and he never tried to do it again. And that's why I told everybody, my dad's bigger than your dad, smarter than your dad. I thought he was Superman. Have you ever had a time when you felt like the Lord stepped into your situation? Maybe you didn't do anything about the situation, but you felt him close. Oh. Imagine this guy. He's going through a tough place. He's like, "Man, God, I feel like I'm just surrounded. But I know you're there, and I know your word's true." It's like the Lord stepped into his situation, reminding me, I'm here. I care. And y'all know this, don't you? God's a majority. All by himself. Thirdly and finally, notice the testimony of the psalmist. Verse 152 is really cool. He says this, "Of old I have known from your testimonies that you have founded them forever." You know why I trust God so much? You know why I trust his word so much? This is me just testifying to you right now. The reason I've only been alive for 61 years. I've only known the Lord for all but 11 of those years, or whatever it may be. I doubt there's many people been to church more than I have in the last, however many years that adds up to be, 50 years, whatever it is. You know why I really have chosen to bank my life on Him and trust Him and follow Him and never give up on what He tells me. It's because we have a record in front of us that is spotless. Every promise He's ever made has been fulfilled. There's a few left out there that haven't, but I'm trusting that those are going to be fulfilled because He's never failed before, right? And so here's a guy in a really tough situation, and to testify at the end of what he said tonight, of old I have known of your testimonies. Man, I can go back and think about times when my grandparents sat and testified to me about how the Lord had been faithful in their lives. I can go back and see the story of how my father broke a generational chain, literally, from not having a father that was honorable and being from a broken home in a very difficult time and raised in a very harsh way and making the choice, I will not follow that. I will not be like my dad, who was an alcoholic and left his family, and I'm going to honor God and honor my wife. And I'm so thankful for that heritage that all gets linked back to who God is and how God has been faithful. And I can stand and testify story after story after story in my family of how God's been so incredibly faithful as a response to the faithfulness of my family. Wow. There's almost no divorce in my family. Who can say that today? There's almost none. Maybe there's some people tolerating each other, but I'm telling you, there's very little divorce. From a family that rooted in not too many generations was filled with that. And the choice of following the Lord. And to be able to stand here this evening and say, I've got 2 brothers that love Jesus, that have families that love Jesus, and I have 3 daughters in my home and 2 that are married that love the Lord. And I don't know why, but they choose to come to church here. I don't demand that, ask that. They just come. And I'm so thankful for that. It's the testimony of His faithfulness, right? I looked at a couple of other, let's read these. Of old I have known from your testimonies that you have founded them forever. I looked up in the Living Bible, which is not a translation, but it's a really good thing to read sometimes. It says this: I have known from the earliest days that your will never changes. Wow. Is it important that we teach our preschoolers at this church about who Jesus is? Yes. Is it important we teach our children and our teenagers and our adults that? Yes. The Message Bible says this. It says, I've known all along from the evidence of your words that you meant them to last forever. Name another book in this world that is timeless. God's not changed His mind. We don't need to rewrite the Scriptures to fit into anything. It's a timeless word. It's an eternal word. It can be trusted. I'm glad it's not fashion sense like we have in the world today, that every 3 years it needs to change or whatever. God's not going to change. He's not going to change His word. He's not going to change His will. And so we can trust Him because He's always been trustworthy. And so, my goodness, what a great word. Just a few verses of Scripture. I wish I could have gotten y'all through this in a couple of weeks instead of half a year, but we're going to get through it. So if you'll hang with me for a few more weeks, we'll get out of Psalm 119 and move on to something else in 120 maybe.